My husband handed me divorce papers on my 72nd birthday. I'm keeping the house, the accounts, everything, he said. You'll walk away with your clothes and whatever's in your purse? My daughter screamed at me to fight. My son drove 4 hours to hire me a lawyer. But I sat down at the kitchen table, poured myself a cup of coffee, and smiled, because my husband had just made the biggest mistake of his life, and he had no idea what I already knew. Good day, everyone. I'm Hannah, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Please give this video a like, and stay with me until the very end. I want to know what city you're listening from. It helps me see how far these stories travel. Now let me tell you about the day my husband of 44 years decided I was disposable, and how I quietly made sure he would spend the rest of his life regretting it. My name is Dorothy, and I am 72 years old. I live in Austin, Texas. Though I grew up in a small town just outside of San Antonio, I was a school librarian for 31 years. I shelved books, helped children fall in love with reading, organized fundraisers, and stayed late on Tuesday evenings to run the after-school homework club. I wasn't glamorous. I wasn't ambitious in the way my husband always admired, but I was steady, and I was present. And I built a life that mattered. My husband's name is Gerald. He was an electrical contractor when I met him, just starting his own company with 2 trucks and a dream. I believed in that dream. I believed in him. I gave up a teaching scholarship in Houston to stay in Austin when his business needed me, answering phones, keeping the books, handling clients when he was out on job sites. By the time our children were born, our daughter Caroline and our son Thomas Gerald's company had grown into something real. 14 employees, commercial contracts, a reputation in the city. I stepped back from the business when the children came. Gerald said it made more sense, that he had it handled, that I should focus on the family. So I did. I raised Caroline and Thomas. I managed our home. I went back to work at the school library when the children were old enough, and spent the next 3 decades doing something I loved. Gerald built his empire. I built our family. I thought we were building it together. I should have paid more attention to the cracks. But after 44 years, you stop noticing the way a house settles. The first sign came on a Wednesday in February. Gerald came home from the office, smelling different. Not perfume, something more subtle than that. A kind of energy. A brightness in his eyes that I hadn't seen in years. He'd been to a business dinner, he said. Investors interested in the company. I nodded and went back to my crossword. I should have asked more questions. The calls started happening more often after that. Late in the evening, Gerald would wander out to the back porch with his phone. I'd watch him through the kitchen window. His posture different than it was on regular work calls. More animated. His hands moved when he talked, the way they used to when he was excited about something. I noticed the credit card statements next. New charges I didn't recognize. A restaurant downtown. Twice in 1 week. A boutique hotel in the Hill Country on a Thursday night when Gerald had told me he was driving to a job site in Waco. Small things. Each one easy to explain away. Together, they made a picture I didn't want to look at. I asked him once, lightly, about the hotel charge. He said there'd been a scheduling mix-up on the Waco project, that he'd stayed closer to Austin instead. His voice was smooth, practiced. The explanation came too easily, the way answers do when they've already been rehearsed. I started noticing more. Our investment account, which I hadn't checked in years because Gerald had always handled it, showed a balance significantly lower than I'd expected. When I mentioned it, he waved me off. Market fluctuations. Dorothy, don't worry yourself about it. I'd been hearing some version of that sentence for decades. Don't worry yourself about it. I let myself believe it. That was my mistake. The birthday dinner started like any other. Caroline drove in from Dallas. Thomas came from San Marcos. And we sat around the table I'd bought at an estate sale 20 years ago and refinished myself over one long summer weekend. Gerald had seemed distant all through the meal, cutting his food without eating much, checking his phone under the table when he thought no one was looking. After the cake, after the candles, after the children had moved into the living room, Gerald asked me to stay at the table. I thought he was going to give me a gift. Maybe a trip. He'd mentioned once that he wanted to see Italy someday. He slid a manila envelope across the table instead. "Dorothy," he said, "I think we both know this has been coming." I looked at the envelope. I looked at my husband's face, and I saw something there that frightened me more than the envelope did. Relief. He was relieved. He had a speech ready. The usual things. We'd grown in different directions. He needed to find out who he was at this stage of life. He respected me. Of course he did. But what we had wasn't really a marriage anymore. It was just a routine. He'd consulted with an attorney. He'd tried to be fair about it. I listened to all of it without saying a word. Inside the envelope were papers that would dissolve 44 years. Gerald would keep the house, which was in his name. He would keep the investment accounts, which were also in his name. The business, obviously, was already his. I would receive a monthly payment, modest, and the car I drove, which was 8 years old and had a transmission issue we'd been putting off fixing. I kept my voice very calm. "And the river cabin?" I asked. He'd bought it 7 years ago, a place out near Marble Falls where we used to take the grandchildren fishing, also in his name. He said, "I'm sorry, Dorothy." He didn't look sorry. I told him I needed time to think. He said he understood. He said his lawyer thought I'd be wise to simply accept the terms rather than drag things out. He said fighting it would only hurt both of us. Then he went upstairs to bed, and I sat at the birthday table alone with the envelope and what was left of my cake. I didn't cry right away. I sat very still for a long time, the way I used to sit in the library at closing time, listening to the buildings settle around me. I thought about every year, every sacrifice, the Houston scholarship, the years in the office before the children, the business trips I'd managed alone, the school plays I'd attended alone, the times I'd covered for Gerald at family gatherings when he was too busy working. I thought about who had cleaned this house, who had raised these children, who had sat beside him at every company dinner and smiled and made his colleagues feel welcome. I thought about what I didn't know, because something told me that what I didn't know was the most important part. In the morning, I called my daughter. Caroline knew something was wrong the moment she heard my voice. I told her everything. She went very quiet, and then she said something that surprised me. "Mom, there's a woman. I've seen her with Dad." I didn't want to say anything because I wasn't sure. But now her name is Lydia. She works with him on some new project. I've seen them together twice in the last 2 months. I asked Caroline to tell me everything she knew. Lydia was younger, maybe mid-40s. Divorced. She'd approached Gerald about some kind of real estate investment venture, a development project on the east side of the city. Gerald had been excited about it, talking about it at family dinners for months. A new phase, he'd called it. I hung up with Caroline and sat with the information for a full hour. Then I asked her to find me a financial attorney. Not a divorce lawyer, not yet. Someone who dealt with business fraud and hidden assets. She called me back that afternoon with a name. Renata Voss. A woman who'd worked for years as a forensic accountant before becoming an attorney. Her office was downtown, and she had a reputation for being, in Caroline's words, absolutely merciless in a courtroom. I used money from the household account, the one Gerald let me manage for groceries and utilities, apparently not considering that I might use it for something else to schedule a consultation. Renata Voss had an office that looked like someone had designed it specifically to make powerful men feel small. She shook my hand, looked at me with clear, sharp eyes, and said, "Tell me everything, starting with the finances." I told her about the investment account that had been drained, about the hotel charges and the restaurant receipts I'd quietly photographed over the past 6 weeks, about the envelope, about Lydia, about the feeling I couldn't shake that something larger was happening beneath the surface of what Gerald had shown me. Renata listened without interrupting. Then she asked me one question. "Do you have access to any of Gerald's business account records? Statements? Tax filings? Anything?" I told her I had access to our filing cabinet, where Gerald kept physical copies going back years. He was old-fashioned that way. He'd never fully trusted cloud storage. "Good," she said. "I need everything you can photograph without being noticed. And Dorothy," she leaned forward slightly, "I need you to be prepared for the possibility that what we find is worse than you're imagining." I wasn't scared. I'd been scared the night of my birthday, sitting at that table alone. That fear had turned into something else by morning, something quieter and harder. I told her I was prepared. The next 2 weeks, I became someone Gerald had never known me to be. While he was at the office, I went through that filing cabinet with my phone camera, photographing every document I could find. Business bank statements, tax returns, a thick folder of contracts I didn't recognize, with the name of a company I'd never heard of, Crestview Development, LLC, stamped across the top, loan documents, a second mortgage on our house, our home, the one Gerald claimed he was keeping signed 4 years ago without my knowledge. My hands were shaking when I photographed that last one. Not from fear, from something else. I forwarded everything to Renata's office that evening and waited. She called me 4 days later. "Dorothy, I need you to come in. Bring nothing, tell no one." The drive downtown felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. When I sat across from Renata, her desk was covered in printed documents. "Your husband has borrowed against your home 3 times in the last 6 years, she said. "He took out a second mortgage, a line of credit, and a personal business loan using the house as collateral. Combined, he owes approximately $340,000 against a property he was planning to hand himself in the divorce settlement. The property you'd have signed away." I felt the number land somewhere in my chest. "There's more," she said. "Crestview Development LLC was registered by your husband and a woman named Lydia Marsh 2 years ago. It appears to be a real estate venture, but the financials are unusual. Money has been flowing from Gerald's contracting company into Crestview in ways that look less like investment and more like concealment. He has also significantly understated his business income on financial disclosure documents in the past 3 years. Is that fraud?" I asked. Renata looked at me steadily. "It's several kinds of fraud." That evening, Gerald came home in a good mood. He mentioned, offhandedly, that I should probably start thinking about finding an apartment. "Something modest," he said. "Austin prices are hard, but there are decent places on the east side." He said it like he was doing me a favor. Like the east side of a city he'd built his life in was something I should be grateful to be offered. I put his dinner on the table and asked him about his day. He said it was fine. Busy, lots of moving pieces. I said I was sure there were. He looked at me for just a moment, something passing across his face, a flicker of uncertainty. Then he picked up his fork and started eating. 2 days later, I retained Renata officially. She contacted the Texas Department of Banking with our documentation. She filed a motion to freeze joint assets pending full forensic audit. She began the process of contesting the divorce terms. Gerald found out when his business account flagged a freeze attempt. He came home at 6 in the evening, and the door didn't close behind him. It hit the frame hard enough to shake the window above the sink. "Dorothy," his voice was very controlled, which meant he was furious, What have you done? I was at the stove. I turned around slowly. I made my expression as neutral as I could manage. I've retained a lawyer, I said. I hope that's all right. You froze my accounts. His jaw was tight. Do you understand what that does to a business? To payroll? You borrowed $340,000 against my home without telling me? I said. Do you understand what that does to a wife? He went very still. The silence stretched between us, and in that silence I watched something shift in his face. He'd expected tears. He'd expected begging or anger. He hadn't expected this. Those loans are business matters, he said finally. You don't understand the complexity. I understand them perfectly well, I said. Renata Voss understands them even better. Her office is filing a full disclosure request with the court this week. You went to a lawyer before you talked to me? His voice rose slightly. You served me divorce papers on my birthday, Gerald. He took 2 steps toward me, and I made myself hold very still. I've been your wife for 44 years, I thought. I have cooked in this kitchen and raised children in this house and balanced the books for your business and sat beside you in hospital waiting rooms and buried your parents and mine. I am not afraid of you. He stopped. Dorothy, he said, his voice shifting, softer now, the voice he used when he wanted something. This is going to get very ugly if you don't let me handle it. Renata Voss has a reputation for dragging things out for years. Think about Caroline and Thomas. And think about the grandchildren. Do we really want to put them through that? I thought about Caroline on the phone, telling me quietly about Lydia. I thought about Thomas driving 4 hours the morning after my birthday because he'd heard in his mother's voice that something was wrong. My children are fine, I said. Good night, Gerald. He left that night and didn't come back. I changed the locks the following morning. 3 days later, a car I didn't recognize parked in front of my house. I watched from the living room window as a woman walked up the front path. She was well dressed. A silk blouse, expensive sunglasses pushed up into highlighted hair. She knocked with the confidence of someone who expected doors to open for them. I opened the door. She introduced herself as Lydia. She said she just wanted to come by, woman to woman, to see if there was a way to resolve things civilly. Gerald had told her about the legal complications. She understood how hard this must be. I looked at her for a long moment. She was younger than I'd imagined, maybe 43. There was something studied about her. Every element of her appearance arranged for maximum effect. That's very thoughtful of you, I said. Would you like to come in? She didn't expect that. The pause was small, but I saw it. I brought her into the living room and offered her coffee. She declined. She sat in the armchair across from the couch and crossed her ankles and said that she and Gerald had something real between them, that she hoped I could find it in myself not to make this harder than it had to be, that we were all adults. We are, I agreed. Which is why I'd like to ask you something directly. Were you aware that Gerald took out a second mortgage on this house to fund Crestview development? Or did he represent the investment capital as coming from other sources? Her expression didn't change quite fast enough. I have no idea what you mean, she said. Renata believes you do, I said. She also found something interesting about Crestview's incorporation documents. The registered agent listed is a company that was also listed on 2 previous LLCs that were dissolved under investigation in Colorado and Georgia. Did you know Gerald has been reviewing those records? She uncrossed her ankles. I'm not sure where you're getting your information, she said carefully. Court filings are public record, I said pleasantly. My attorney is very thorough. Lydia stood up. She said I was confused and bitter, and that dragging this out would only hurt me. She said that Gerald had built everything he had through his own work, and that I was holding on to something that had been over for years. I stood too. I was a librarian for 31 years, I said. I have always believed that the most important thing you can do is make sure you're working from accurate information. I suggest you speak with your own attorney before our next court date. I'd hate for you to be caught off guard." She left, with her chin up and her heels loud on the porch steps. I closed the door and leaned against it and breathed for a full minute. Then I called Renata. The preliminary hearing was in April. I arrived early with Renata and sat at our table and watched Gerald come in with two attorneys I didn't recognize. He looked tired. He'd lost some of the careful ease I'd seen at the birthday table. The judge's name was Patricia Okonkwo, a woman in her early 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a manner that reminded me of every no-nonsense principal I'd ever worked for. She reviewed the motion to address asset concealment before proceeding with standard divorce terms. Renata laid out everything methodically. The second mortgage, the undisclosed line of credit, the business loan, the Crestview LLC, and its financial irregularities, the pattern of income underreporting on financial disclosures. She called our forensic accountant, who walked through the numbers with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this many times. Gerald's lead attorney, a man named Breckenridge, objected repeatedly. These are complex business transactions being mischaracterized by someone with no financial background. His language was smooth and dismissive, clearly designed to make everything sound like a misunderstanding. Judge Okonkwo looked at him over her glasses. "Mr. Breckenridge, I have a CPA's report and 3 years of bank records in front of me. I don't need a financial background. I need accurate documents." "Continue, Miss Voss," Renata continued. When she presented the documentation on Lydia's prior business history, 2 previous investment ventures in other states, both dissolved under circumstances that had attracted regulatory attention. Gerald turned to look at me for the first time. His expression was something I hadn't seen on his face before. I couldn't name it exactly. His attorney attempted to reframe it all, but the paper trail was what it was. Documents don't lie, and Gerald had never expected anyone to read them closely enough to notice. And then Renata called me to speak. I walked to the front of the room and sat down and looked at Judge Okonkwo, and I told the truth. I told her about 44 years, about the Houston scholarship I'd given up, about the years I'd spent in that company's office before anyone else believed in it, about the children raised, the home maintained, the seasons of Gerald's mother's decline I'd sat through alone because Gerald was always building something, about the birthday envelope. "I am 72 years old," I said, "and I have spent my entire adult life contributing to this marriage and this family. I didn't sign those loan documents because I was never shown them. I didn't know about Crestview because I was never told. My husband planned to leave me in an apartment on the east side of my own city while he kept the house I've lived in for 30 years, the house that is mortgaged against money I didn't know he'd borrowed." I looked at Gerald then. "He always thought I wasn't paying attention," I said, "that I didn't understand the financial side of things, that I was just the librarian. But I was paying attention, Gerald. Every single year. And I understand everything now." Gerald's attorney started to interject. Judge Okonkwo raised one hand. She sat quietly for a moment, looking through the documents. Her preliminary ruling froze all marital assets and ordered a complete forensic audit of Gerald's business accounts and the Crestview LLC. I was granted sole occupancy of the house, pending final proceedings. Temporary support was set at $4,500 per month. Gerald looked like a man who'd just watched the floor drop out from under him. The final proceedings came 8 weeks later. In the time between, the Texas State Comptroller's Office opened an inquiry into Crestview Development's filings. 2 of Gerald's commercial clients filed complaints about billing irregularities that the freeze had brought to light. His company's bonding license was suspended pending review. Lydia disappeared from the picture almost completely. I heard from Caroline that she'd already distanced herself from the project, already begun referring to Gerald as a cautionary tale on her private social media accounts. Later, a journalist who covered financial fraud wrote a piece that named her history across 3 states. She tried to have it taken down. She couldn't. At the final hearing, Judge Okonkwo had the forensic audit results. The total marital estate, properly accounted for, came to approximately $1.1 million. Gerald had obscured nearly $400,000 of it through the Crestview structure and related accounts. The ruling was direct. I was awarded the house, free and clear, with the outstanding mortgage debt assigned to Gerald as part of the settlement. I received 60% of all retirement and investment accounts. I received the river cabin, which Gerald had included in the Crestview structure, in a way that Renata had very quietly untangled. I received spousal support of $5,000 monthly for 12 years. Gerald was responsible for all legal fees. Gerald sat motionless through the reading of the terms. He didn't shout. He didn't try to stand up. He just sat there with his hands flat on the table, a man who'd spent 44 years moving through the world as though he were the only person in it who understood how things worked. He was wrong. As I walked past him on the way out of the courtroom, he said my name, just once. Dorothy. I stopped. I looked at him. He looked old to me, suddenly, and small in a way he'd never looked before. I know you think I did this to hurt you, he said. I thought about that for a moment. No, I said. I think you did it because you didn't think I'd notice. And I want you to understand something. I'm not angry with you anymore. I'm just finished. I walked out into the April sunlight and stood on the courthouse steps while Renata shook my hand and Caroline hugged me so hard she lifted me slightly off the ground, and Thomas, who had driven in again from San Marcos, pressed his forehead against mine the way he used to do when he was small. That's it, Mom, he said. It's done. You won. I sold the Austin house 6 months later. I know that might seem strange after everything I'd gone through to keep it, but the truth was I didn't need it the way I'd thought I did. Too many rooms that were wrong now. Too many corners where the past lived. I'd fought for it because it was mine. I'd won, and then I decided I didn't want it anymore. I bought a smaller house instead. A craftsman bungalow in a neighborhood near the university. Close enough to walk to a coffee shop in the mornings, with a front porch deep enough for a rocking chair, and a backyard big enough for a real garden. I planted roses along the back fence. Climbing ones. The kind that take years to establish, but don't come down in wind. I went back to the library. Not as an employee, as a volunteer. Tuesday mornings, with the after-school reading program. I'd forgotten how much I loved it. Sitting on a low chair while a child sounded out words for the first time, watching their face when the meaning clicked. I started taking a watercolor class at the community center. I was not good at it. I went every week anyway. I traveled. First, a trip with Caroline to the Pacific Northwest, the 2 of us driving the coast with nowhere to be. Then a week in New Mexico with an old friend from my library days. Then, the following spring, 10 days in Portugal with Thomas and his family, eating fish and watching my grandchildren run into the Atlantic Ocean for the first time. I dated a little, too. Nothing serious. A retired civil engineer named Frank, who made wonderful tamales and laughed at all my jokes. We had coffee most Saturdays. It was easy and kind and exactly what I needed at exactly the right time. Gerald's situation unfolded the way things do when you've built on a foundation you weren't honest about. The state inquiry expanded. He entered into a settlement with his former clients. The business he'd spent 30 years building was sold at a fraction of its value to cover debts. He moved into a rental apartment in Cedar Park. I heard this from Caroline, who maintained minimal contact, birthday calls and holidays, the kind of careful thinness that is what remains of a father-daughter relationship after something like this. He paid his support payments on time, every month. I never had to chase them. I deposited them without ceremony and moved on with my day. Lydia resurfaced once, briefly, in a local magazine profile about women entrepreneurs. The piece was credulous and breezy and made no mention of the Colorado LLC or the Georgia inquiry or the Crestview development collapse. I read it in the waiting room of my dentist's office, set it back on the stack, and picked up a different magazine. What I learned, sitting in my garden one morning about a year after everything was settled, is that strength doesn't always announce itself. I was never the loudest person in any room. I was never the one who got credited for the things that held everything together. I was the librarian. I was the woman who made sure the household ran. I was the one in the background. But I was paying attention. The whole time, I was paying attention. At 72 years old, I learned to speak on my own behalf in a courtroom. I learned to read financial documents I'd never bothered with before. I learned that my name should have been on more things and that I would never make that mistake again. I learned that the women who reach across in those courtroom hallways, the other quiet women watching cases unfold, the ones who squeeze your arm and say you've got this without even knowing your name, those women are a kind of family. I learned that starting over at 72 is terrifying for exactly 2 weeks. After that, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes yours. My granddaughter was here last Saturday. She's 9, Caroline's youngest. We sat on the back porch and she helped me deadhead the climbing roses, and she asked me why I grew them when they had so many thorns. I thought about it for a moment. Because they take a long time to grow, I said. But once they take hold, nothing can pull them down. She considered this with the seriousness that 9-year-olds bring to serious things. Then she asked if she could water them. I handed her the hose. If my story spoke to something you've been carrying, please share it. You never know who might need to hear it today. And I want to hear from you. Where are you listening from? Leave it in the comments below. From wherever you are, I hope you know your worth. I hope you're paying attention. And I hope, whatever room you're sitting in right now, you understand that it is never, not ever, too late to stand up for yourself. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'm Hannah, and I'll see you in the next story.